Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Waterside Press, and I was impressed with it. It's Waterside Press are an excellent publishing house putting justice into words, and they look at particular areas of law, mainly in the criminal jurisdiction, where there are clearly very urgent needs for review and reformation, if I can put it that way. And this is one which I took my fancy, I have to say. Drug Science and British Drug Policy. That book there. Critical Analysis of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. Now, I'm old enough to know when the Act came in, because I remember it coming in at the time, and I remember when I did my bar exams many years ago now, that one of our exercises actually featured this particular legislation. And when they say it's not very good legislation, I'm afraid they're right. The book's been edited by Ilana Crome, David Nutt and Alex Stevens. And can I just say there's an excellent introduction, a foreword by Norman Baker, a Lib Dem ex-MP, but Norman makes some good points. I've given it a title for the review. We'll look at the book in a second. Positive Analysis of Why the Misuse of Drugs Act 1979 needs to be replaced. Now, I've no doubt nothing much will happen, unfortunately, but at least we've got a book which is pointing out that there is a need to look again at how we structure the relevant sanctions on drugs. There's the book. It's a paperback. That's the spine. You can see the spine there. And then on the back you've got a little bit of blurb, not much. Part of it's probably in my review, because actually the book itself is it's only 300 odd pages. It's a very interesting book. There's a short index at the back covering a few important areas. There you can see the index. Then just by the index is effectively the last chapter, and each chapter actually has the names of people who've written that chapter, and they've also got bibliographical details as a follow-up depending on what you're doing. The front of the book is there. Then we go from there to the table of contents. You can see the structure, and as I say, each of the chapters, the parts in the chapters, the person or persons writing those chapters are mentioned. So At the Frontiers of Psychiatry by Ilana Crome and David Nutt kicks us off, basically, with obviously the foreword first, and then you can see the run through of the various, as I flick through it, the various pages. There are 20 chapters in total. The foreword by Norman Baker is worth reading. He's making perhaps a couple of minor political points, but he now Mr. Sort of Television, Norman Mr. Television Baker. He's on TV a lot doing reviews and things, but he does make sense, I have to say, with a lot of what he says, and there's a little bit of detail about him and what he's putting forward. Now, there's a publisher's note saying the views and opinions of this book are those of the individual authors, not necessarily shared by the publishers. There's also a dedication. Elizabeth and I only review books we like. We don't review books we don't like, because there's no point. I'm not going to start attacking a book if I don't like it, because I know how much work goes into writing. There are the details of the authors. Then you can see the introduction there, introductory chapter. You've got some footnoting at the bottom there, and then you've got some subheads, but no paragraph numbering. And it runs through quite nicely. I quite like the way many of the chapters have conclusions, which helps. And I think it is trying to take what I would describe as a grown-up approach towards what we're going to do with drugs policy in the future. It will take a courageous government, I think, to make substantial changes, because we've had shifts in the movement of some types of drugs from one class to another and then back again, and there may well be a lot of other changes, but we haven't yet as a society worked out what we're going to do. But we certainly, I think, do need to start looking at this area of statutory reform. So what do I say? Well, I'll start off with well-known Lib Dem Norman Baker contributes an important foreword to this excellent new paperback from the publishers Waterside Press, who are putting justice into words. And Baker writes, quote, "It's time to see the MDA 1971 for what it is, a bad law that has the opposite effect of that intended. The so-called war on drugs is lost," he says. "It could never be won," he says. "Let us replace this knee-jerk law with something rational and something evidence-based, something more humane." Now, I can see that argument. I'm not going to go through the history of why we got to 1971 with the Heath regime and the fact that that legislation came in after the problems of the 1960s, which I remember well. The fact is that what we do need is to have another look in the year 2023 at where we're going. The call for action, I think, is therefore well timed, but it's doubtful that anything will happen, at least at the moment, because what we have is this well-argued book from the three editors, Crome, Nutt and Stevens, and at least that's a start-off point. The editors, of course, are an interesting gathering of professional expertise, and I'm going to mention their bibliographical details are at the front of the book. Ilana Crome is Professor Emeritus of Addiction and Psychiatry at the University of Kiel. She's contributed widely to research, training and policy on addiction and substance use, and is an editor of major textbooks in this field. And of course, Professor David Nutt, been on television, is a founder of Drug Science UK and author of over 500 papers and 35 books around the subject. Thirdly, Alex Stevens is Professor of Criminal Justice at the University of Kent. He's worked on issues of drugs, public health and crime in the voluntary sector as a researcher and as an advisor to the UK government. And we're fortunate that the editors are supported by 25 experts of considerable standing in the field of drugs policy, education and research. And I think that's really where the change will eventually come. It'll have to be evidence-based and expert-based. The difficulty we've got is that there isn't a political will to do it at the moment, and I think we're going to wait a while. But this is one of a number of pieces of legislation that do need to be looked at quite quickly. And of course the case they put is that for 50 years we've had the Misuse of Drugs Act, 1971, being dominated by ill-conceived approaches to the prohibition of drugs and the criminalisation of many offenders. Of course, you know what the prison system is like and what the actual inmates are within the prisons and the amount of drug usage in the prisons. You can see there is a major problem which everybody hopes will go away, and they haven't made any decisions about it. The editors then go on to say that willful blindness to scientific facts has distorted the dispensation of justice, preventing life-saving investigation, sidelined critics and thwarted advocates of politically inconvenient drugs law reform. And that has been the problem over successive governments. Doesn't matter what colour they are, red or blue, there have been problems. It's accurate as a statement, of course, but it indicates the substantial failure to rectify what remains a massive social and criminal problem. Not going to change, it's going to get worse. And I say that quite bluntly. It's time that people did their jobs. It's time that people recognised and wake up to some of the really serious matters that need to be looked at as we get to the middle of the century. It'll be way past my time on this planet. But at least we are now looking at where we may be going. Drug Science and British Drug Policy, therefore, is a well-described book, and it's an epoch review by experts from a range of disciplines which show how lawmakers and the media have ignored the scientific evidence to sustain badly founded rhetoric in favour of blanket bans, punishment and the marginalisation of opponents. And that's quite a serious set of comments, if I can put it as lightly as that. But you can see that there are problems, because the book concludes that countless individuals, including the vulnerable, deprived, addicted and mentally ill, have therefore suffered unnecessarily. And if nothing else, the statistics on drugs misuse prove the point again and again. And of course that's the problem. And I'm afraid it's the old story of the ostrich burying the head in the sand approach. And it's time that the head is taken out and we start looking at the problem properly. The book is the most comprehensive critique of the 1971 statute to date, as far as I understand it. The case for urgent change rests on the combined learning of leading medical, scientific, psychiatric, academic, legal, drug safety and other specialists to provide sound reasons to rethink half a century of bad law. And what we need, therefore, is a new law for the 21st century. but we don't believe we'll get it for a very long time, and that's the problem. However, we'd like to thank Waterside and the people involved in this book for at least raising the need for repeal and revision. Probably another 20 to 30 years will float by before we see real action, but it's not a particularly pleasant thought to actually think about. But do read the book, because I think you will find the book of some help when you come to think about what sort of policies we might have, because we do have a problem of addiction and it's not going to go away. The date of publication of this new paperback is cited at the 9th of November 2022, and I'm recording it at the end of the year. I'd like to thank everybody again. Here's the book, just to show you. There's the spine and the back, just opening it in the middle. Harm reduction in Switzerland and across Europe. That's quite useful, because what you've got is comparative studies with other countries looking at the problem. And I will point out again, there's a nice conclusion each time. There's a detail about the writers, and there's a reference and easy extra reading. I think probably from one point of view it's a very, very good chronological series of essays, apart from anything else. But thank you, Waterside, and thank you to everybody concerned for raising this point. It's not going to go away. Let's hope something will be done about it soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.